behind schedule. My name is Nike Koka Babalola from the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, the National Early Warning Center. I'll be anchoring this morning, and we would like to start today's event by singing the Nigerian National Anthem. Shall we all rise, please? Thank you very much. May we please take our seats? I'd like to acknowledge all distinguished guests present at this edition of the Imagine Nigeria Project event, all developmental bodies and representatives of government NDAs here present, people who have worked tirelessly to put this event in place in the interest of the region and Africa in its totality. Permit me to acknowledge any representatives or consultants of the UNDP present, the Imagine Nigeria Secretariat, the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, our distinguished panelists who have come from different corners of the continent to join us today, our online keynote speaker, our partners of the Imagine Nigeria Project, gentlemen of the press. Now, today's event is themed Let's Talk, Lead Africa, and it plans to engage our panelists and audience in discussions that will highlight not just peace, security, and development, but also offer suggestions on transnational partnerships for positive action with Nigeria as the lead facilitator of such actions. To speak this morning on the Imagine Nigeria project, permit me to invite Larry Shashare, the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Planning and Coordination. Larry also leads the Imagine Nigeria Secretariat. Can we all warmly welcome her as she gives an overview of the Imagine Nigeria project? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nika. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Larry Shashare, as Nika said, and I work in the Imagine Nigeria Secretariat. I'll just share a broad overview of the project, the exercise thus far, before we go into, before we share a trailer video of the project and what it's about. The Imagine Nigeria project, which resulted in a study, began during the COVID pandemic, and it was viewed as an opportunity for some self-reflection on Nigeria's future, to consider the ways in which we could use the opportunity of the pandemic for a reset. If you recall, everybody was thinking of ways in which to build back better. Well, this is one of our, this was our approach to do that in Nigeria. The idea was to think of the future and the potential futures for Nigeria, to conduct an analysis of that future. So you'll see, we're sharing the report at the moment, you'll see alternative scenarios for Nigeria's future. In addition to that, and I think what is new about the Imagine Nigeria study is that we also identified recommendations for Nigeria's future. Basically, what are the things that we need to have done to ensure a successful future for the country. So it's a free-ranging exercise. It's not, people who are familiar with planning tools, it's not a medium-term planning tool, it's not a long-term vision. These are things that are normally done for countries. The exercise involved engaging with various stakeholders within the country, outside of the country, Nigerians, experts on Nigeria, people from different facets of Nigerian life. We engaged with over 300 individuals through focus group discussions, through personal interviews, to identify what they saw as the current challenges for this country, to review the trends globally, global trends, to identify opportunities for Nigeria within the current trajectory of the world, and also to consider their hopes for Nigeria's future. Now, as I said, the study, we're also calling it a framework as well because it includes not only the study but also various resources. We have a toolkit on the website, imaginenigeria.ng. We have videos. We have different types of activities on the website that allow us to engage with the public. So the framework comprises the study, which identifies 5 recommendations. These recommendations include building a culture of innovation for the future, catalyzing a green economy. The third recommendation is for Nigeria to lead Africa in order to be successful, because it's done so in the past, it has the tools to do so, and it can continue to do, and it in fact does so today with soft power, using culture and entertainment. And these 3 recommendations are to be driven by 2 others. The first of these is to build trust in society, not only between government and the people, but also among communities within the country. And also, the final one is to facilitate a national narrative. Basically, what are the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are? And we feel that these will drive our identity as a country and also ensure a successful future. So that's really the Imagine Nigeria framework, the report, the recommendations. So we're now going to go into a trailer that shares more information about the study. Thank you. Do we have the video?
Nigeria, a country filled with abundant talent, energy, and creativity, ready to embrace a new era.
But we also face a looming climate crisis, the economic impact of a pandemic, deepening insecurity and inequality, and the need to govern effectively for the benefit of all Nigerians.
Let us imagine the next few decades and shine a light on 4 possible scenarios, the challenges and the great opportunities laying ahead of us.
Fire on the mountain.
Nigeria chooses to keep things as they are. As insecurity and other challenges intensify, will a youth-led resistance rise, or will they simply be crushed?
Which way, Nigeria?
Nigeria uses innovation to address security and diversify revenue, but it neglects governance and issues of identity. Will Nigerians live under a surveillance state or fall into cyber warfare led by a tech-savvy opposition?
One chance.
Nigeria is hijacked by tech giants. Tech delivers some wealth at the cost of freedom. Will Nigerians relinquish control, or will the people embrace a hard reset and encourage a million flowers to bloom?
African giants are weak.
Leveraging its people's talent for innovation, Nigeria taps into global trends to build a thriving economy, transform society, and accountable governance while leading Africa.
By painting these scenarios, we recognize the challenges on the horizon, taking them on with dignity and courage, because the future is ours to imagine, and we must all be a part of the solution.
And as a constructive guide to a flourishing 21st century, we propose 5 pillars of transformation: building a culture of innovation, catalyzing the green economy, leading Africa, building trust, and finally, facilitating a national narrative.
Together, we can make a difference.
Take action. Join the movement and visit imaginenigeria.ng today.
Thank you, Larry, for the overview that you gave. Just as Larry has said, the Imagine Nigeria project is meant to promote conversations and actions to build our desired future. So for more information, like the full or the abridged version of the report, please visit the website, Imagine Nigeria, one word, imaginenigeria.ng. So a little bit about today's event. The Lead Africa event is inspired on the Lead Africa chapter of the Imagine Nigeria report. And the objectives of today's event is really to deepen understanding of the dominant trends in Nigeria's here and abroad, and also to create a platform for young, diverse people to speak about issues that matter to them, to speak about their future. And like I said, to offer suggestions, not just in Nigeria, in other countries across the continent, about how to create partnerships for positive action. Finally, positioning Nigeria as the leader of this conversation is very key. We plan to promote peace, we plan to promote cooperation and stability in the region using Nigeria as the leader. At this point, we'll take the first keynote address of today's event. Our speaker is joining us virtually. I'll read out his profile if I'm correct. He is, oh, is he cute? Is he ready? Okay, our keynote address speaker, Julius Gatune, is a senior research and policy advisor at the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, with extensive research done on long-term planning. Mr. Gatune advises governments across Africa on issues of economic transformation. And this morning, he'll be speaking to us on why Africa needs Nigeria and how Nigeria can lead Africa. Can we warmly welcome Mr. Julius Gatune, who'll be joining us virtually. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
So you can hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
I also have some slide maybe I can share a side talk. So I'm going to talk about, as you say, is it clear? Can it be seen? Let me just first of all clear that am I clear? You can see it, yeah? And you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, so I'm going to talk about Nigeria leads Africa. And as you know, obviously, Nigeria has been a leader in Africa, that's for sure, in terms of demographic, in terms of economic, and so on. But the question is that that influence, that potential has not been really reflected. And therefore, this analysis looks at three things that are key into becoming a leader. Basically, you need hard power, but you need soft power. And when you talk of hard power, you're talking of economic power, demographic, military strength, trade and investment, and so on. And then also in terms of military power, in terms of stabilizing, give the power to stabilize. So those are the hard powers that we look at. And then on the other hand, which is actually quite important, is soft power. And therefore the cultural power that comes from music, culture, sports, written words, spiritual power. And the diplomatic power also comes from giving technical assistance, negotiation, capability, and so on. And therefore, the question is, how does Nigeria stand these four pillars? Then ask ourselves, where are the gaps? Where are the capabilities? What can we build on? Yeah. So that is the whole idea behind it. So I'm going to talk to that. But beyond that, you also have to be desire. What that desire and willingness to lead. So it's not just because you have this. Some people might have this, but they don't have the hunger or the desire to really want to lead, to take the leadership. In terms of desire and willingness, Nigeria has, from the word go, from, if you look at even at the initial, from independence, Nigeria did that it needs. So Nigeria was actually, has that desire to take lead. It has obviously intervened where it can to bring peace, and also Nigeria has also sought to have a seat at United Nations Security Council to represent Africa. So that one is there. Hard power, yes, Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa. Demographic, 50% of Africans are Nigeria. Significant military capabilities, yes, for peacekeeping. Music, films, talk of Nollywood, sports, we talk of Nigerian sports people are known either as Nigerians or as diaspora. They're all over the world in all kinds of sports. Soft power, spiritual powerhouse, Nigeria church is everywhere in Africa nowadays. Even Nigeria also has a significant, is a significant in terms of being a Muslim country, part of the Islamic country. So Nigeria has that soft power from that perspective. And also Nigeria is a diplomatic force. Actually, Nigeria is one of the few countries in Africa that provides technical assistance to other countries. However, this does not reflect in terms of how Nigeria thinks. So you can't, has not been able to leverage this carefully. Because even some places, you might see, for example, if you think of Sierra Leone and Liberia, that owe quite a bit of Nigeria stability they have. They have even failed to support Nigeria in some of where Nigeria has looked for some seats. The challenge with Nigeria is that there are quite a number of contradictions in terms of all this, and we'll come to it. And then also, there's clearly no coherent strategy of how to, and this part of this exercise was really to start thinking, what should be the party strategy look like? So, if I look at the economy, the market of Nigeria is huge. Just the huge market in terms of, and that allows Nigeria to build multinationals. And you can see obviously Nigeria Bank, they're all over Africa, UBA for example, and even globally. And therefore they have a market to be able to build African champions and local champions and even African champions. If you think of MTN, for example, which is a South African company, the MTN Nigeria has higher valuation than the MTN in South Africa, because really the market in Nigeria has allowed MTN to even go outside. I think it has some branches in the Middle East, but that is because it has used that leverage. So Nigeria can be the powerhouse to help Africans champions, build African champions, local and also African champions, by providing certain incentives, and we'll come back to that. Then also, innovations, again, the market can also drive innovation. If you think of it, for example, Nigeria did put a mandate on sorghum. You have to use sorghum as opposed to barley in terms of beer. But because the market is so huge, Guineans or other people, they couldn't leave Nigeria, so they had to actually develop malting and a lot of technology. And one of the biggest malting plants for sorghum in the world is in Nigeria. And therefore, Nigeria actually, because of that market, can also drive local innovation. And we have also seen this in terms of cassava machines for making food and those kind of things being developed in Nigeria. And actually some of cassava dryers have been exported to other African countries. Again, leveraging that market. And therefore, Nigeria is actually now seen as part of the next 11. That's Goldman Sachs talks of the next 11 as the countries that are the next big powerhouses, including South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Pakistan, and also part of what might be called the Mint Group, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey. So Nigeria has that economic power, and it's already a tractor. In West Africa, Nigeria kind of drives, some of the economies really depend on Nigeria, and it can be the African locomotive. But where? There are also challenges. Nigeria can be a difficult place to do business. You remember there was a huge dispute between MTN and Nigeria, where a fine of 8.1 billion was imposed. And finally, there was a settlement of $53 million. Not to say that MTN was not right or wrong, but it tends to ask the question, where would you come from 8.1 billion to 53? It shows that quite a bit of uncertainty, because when a government makes a decision, you expect that decision to be almost close to what they know what they're saying. Those are kind of contradictions I'm saying. If you think of ECOWAS, Nigeria has been a leader of ECOWAS, but it's difficult. I've worked in Ghana many years and other places in terms of trade, but it's very, very difficult even for Ghanaian people to try and get their goods to Nigeria. They get all kinds of issues. So Nigeria, in a way, has a protectionist tendency, yet it should be the leader in terms of trade. And you can imagine even the other day when we do the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Nigeria was like the 18th or 30th country to ratify it. Yet would expect Nigeria to be at the forefront of that kind of things. Again, you also see kind of policy inconsistency, even in Nigeria. For example, all of you know about the cassava bread. Sometimes it's 10%, 40%, then it goes away, comes back. So Nigeria has to do interesting policy innovation in terms of breading, but then also there's also challenges for policy consistency. So that makes the economic leverage a bit difficult to get the full impact of it. Now, if you go to military, yes, good history from Congo onwards, Lebanon, and so on. Nigeria has been a forefront of peacekeeping in Africa, but this has deteriorated. For example, one of the studies says that Nigeria cannot meet 20% of the logistical needs required, because when you send UN missions, you also do certain contributions. So for, if you put the DAFO mission, Nigeria had and some other study talked of 30% of the armored personnel carriers of Nigeria Army not being operational. There has always been the change that if you go out there and you become you do very well, again, you start creating kinds of new heroes that, and this might not work very well politically back home. Boko Haram obviously has also created some challenges there. And therefore, currently Nigeria is ranked fourth in terms of military power, second behind Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. Therefore, Nigeria, the economic power does not reflect, it's not reflected in the military power. Yet it's the biggest, we would expect that to be. And obviously, when you talk about military power, it's not about coercion, it's about being able to keep peace. Because, and actually a study by Institute of Security Studies says, Nigeria is the only country in Africa that has potential to have hegemonic lead, to be a hegemonic leader in Africa with global significance. Not only in Africa, but Nigeria can also be globally significant. But such a development will require complete change in current domestic stability, governance, capacity, political leadership. So there are challenges. The potential is there for sure. To think of diplomatic soft power, technical assistance corps, Nigeria has actually sent over 4,000 Nigerian professionals in over 38 countries. This is something quite interesting because I think people like what America calls the Peace Corps. Yeah, Nigeria Trust Fund within the FDB supports a lot of countries, kind of aid. And if you think of some of the countries around Nigeria, if you think of Benin, Togo, Niger, and so on, they're going very much, their smuggling economies are very much dependent on Nigeria. So in a way, Nigeria is already supporting those countries. If you think of 20% of Benin GDP, it's really dependent on those kind of, you can call it parasitic relationship for Nigeria. Yeah. So this is something that you can actually, it's already power that can be used because you can convert it to something else. Powerful diaspora, Nigeria diaspora all over. I think we saw the recent UK contention. One of the contenders for Prime Minister of UK was a Nigerian lady. So Nigeria, for sure, we know the diaspora is powerful and it's out there, can actually be used differently. But when you look at it, you don't see a complete linkages between diplomatic interests and efforts. Obviously, there has also been question that this has been people who are selected there is not straightforward. And even if you think of diplomacy, in terms of the integration is part of the ways. But again, as we say, Nigeria sometimes wants to integrate, sometimes it goes into this other instinct. An interesting thing is that when Nigeria, if you at the dawn of independence, obviously there were two camps. You remember there was a Nkrumah camp that wanted a federal Africa United. But actually Nigeria was the one who said, no, we don't want a federal Africa, we want countries to be as they were. So always Nigeria has always been careful about how to integrate with Africa and how to lead Africa. Cultural power, obviously we have said Nollywood is all known and is being copied everywhere. If you think Nollywood, even if you go almost any African house, you'll get CDs of Nollywood. Even if you go to the remotest, if you go to the village, I'm speaking from Kenya, but if you go to my mother, my aunties in the villages, you'll find Nollywood, them watching Nollywood. Music of Nigeria, you find it everywhere. If here, almost all, if you go to any place in Kenya, any club, it's music, Nigeria. You go to, even outside, I was in Dubai the other day, and I was the music of Nigeria, I could hear it. Netherlands, I hear it. Yeah, sports, obviously, all over. Religion, as I said, Nigeria is but no coherent creative economy strategy, and lack of support structures, obviously, skills, capacity development, access to finance, IP innovation. So all these people, they kind of do it yourself. You don't find that there has been some support, but the support is not coherent. And therefore, and obviously, Nigeria has a huge image problem. These are some of the studies that this picture here shows how Nigeria is seen by a survey of global by BBC. Obviously, it might be biased, but this is what comes out. Depending on how Nigeria and Africa generally they are portrayed in this kind of manner, but that's something that we really need to think of how to cope. That an image is a challenge, because soft power also requires that you have a good image. So, what can we do about this? So, in terms of economic power, how can Nigeria better leverage its economic power? For example, if you talk of the technical assistance program that Nigeria has, and at the same time, as I mentioned, Nigeria has a very vibrant food equipment, because Nigeria has quite good developing out of equipment. While, for example, if you're taking your technical assistance program, it should be the same way to go and probably transfer this equipment processing, or even help Nigeria to capture new markets in terms of food processing equipment, because Africa is urbanizing, most of it is informal, all these kind of equipment are needed. And therefore, Nigeria can actually start exporting this using the technical assistance program. Yeah. Again, Nigeria is a hub, it's an ICT hub. Service. Nigeria can be a big service provider in ICT. It can think of how to become the champion for incubator for African champions. As I said, for example, Nigeria already MTN has grown because of Nigeria. But can Nigeria just start looking at various companies in Africa that are showing great potential and say, we will let you domicile in Nigeria, we'll provide you certain innovations, certain incentives, so that you can come here and grow from here and become kind of a Nigeria. The same way, you have seen countries like Ireland has provided different ways of allowing all these big multinationals to be registered in Ireland or other places. Nigeria can become that. Just see companies with potential, see how do we let you come and work here, grow with our markets, then grow outside. Yeah. Can be the innovative, creative hub. You can bring the most talented Africans in terms of art, in terms of innovation, and so on, and they can become part of that vibrant sector that we already in Nigeria. Yeah. Obviously, the blazing power, you need to build capacity, that is better capability built. You also need to start thinking of, because there has been an idea, how do we support, what is the linkages between security, governance, and development? Because those are the key things that are missing in Africa, and they are not adequate studies. Nigeria can lead in terms of doing those kind of studies, sponsoring MSc, PhD theses on all these kind of topics, yeah, and also shift away from Nigeria, from economic model where Nigeria leads to where you have an African start by force. Because this has been proposed for a long time, to have a force in Africa that can be able to go and quell problems. And Nigeria obviously has economic muscle to start producing, to be able to support such a force. But obviously the question is, who leads it, how does it happen? But Nigeria should take a lead in terms of establishing this, because this has been there for a long time. If you think of cultural, okay, obviously creative economy strategy needs to be rolled down. But if you think of even Nollywood, which is a big example, and copycats all over the world, everywhere in Africa now, everybody is trying to do. We have Riverwood here in Kenya, Gollywood in Ghana. But Nigeria should take the lead of people trying to replicate this model. Go out there, develop these models, build stars who are from other African countries. Let Nollywood be actually the Africa wood. We can call it Afrowood or something. So because Nigeria already has it understands this business very well. Yeah, it has entrepreneurs who have been in this. So it's possible to start thinking of how to make it an African movie hub. The same thing if you think of collaborations. Start supporting different collaborations, because Africa has a huge diversity. Nigeria itself, I think there are over 2,000 ethnic groups. In Africa, you talk of ethnic groups, many with their own cultures. Different collaborations can come out of that. For example, if you think of jazz came from people from African diaspora who mixed with people who came from Haiti who had some classical training and so on. And they came up with a unique sound, which is African-American, called jazz. It's potential for that, because Nigeria already has this creativity, and therefore we can start mining all kinds of diversity in Africa to continue building on that. Better engagement with diaspora, obviously countries have interesting models. If you think of Ireland Ireland even rewards people who are in America many years, many generations, and they still recognize it. India, Israel, yeah. And if you think of it, for example, study abroad programs. They always study abroad programs for outside. You always see American students coming here, but it will be mostly white students. Here you have a very strong HBCU. Why not think of how we can bring HBCU closer to Africa? Bring them, have study so that we target African Americans, which is a big diaspora and can be very, very important. Ghana has been very good in trying to start that diaspora, and Nigeria can obviously do much better with that. So as I said, diplomatic, reorient TAC, the Nigeria Technical Aid Corps to support technology export, also to build negotiation capacity. Because if you start thinking of it, Africa, the biggest challenge in Africa, we have challenges. We have resource-rich countries, but we have challenges in having proper negotiations so that we can be better in doing that. Nigeria has expertise in that, in terms of negotiation. And actually, if you think of it, today, many countries in Africa are doing what is called local content. Everybody's trying to see how more they can get from the mining or from the extractive industry. And Nigeria has done quite well. Actually, Nigeria is a very, very good example of how to do local content example. In Nigeria right now, you are building your own ships there to service the oil rigs and so on. And Nigeria has done very well. And therefore, some of these things, it can start using that technical assistance support to start bringing capabilities to Africans who are resource-rich countries, using that already what Nigeria has, rather than just having general, it can be focused. And obviously, as I said, because Nigeria wants we want to expand to other countries, and how better than to use this as a way to also train managers? Because if you think of it, a lot of managers in the US who are in these big multinationals, if you always look at their history, you find that they were in Peace Corps somewhere. Because Peace Corps is actually a training ground for American managers to go globally. And this can be a vehicle to train Nigerian and other managers to have that global, to start understanding the world, other culture, because that's first of all, to conquer in business, you have to first of all understand people's culture and so on. And therefore, rethink development assistance again. As I said, some of these countries are dependent in Nigeria. Why not just recognize it and say, you Benin, you depend on us through smuggling and such. Why don't we just give you aid and we just have a much better relationship so that then they don't start exploiting Nigeria policies? Because if you think of Nigeria, we stop rice exports, rice imports, but then you'll see the rice imports in Togo, Benin, rice, because it's the same rice that will come back to Nigeria in other ways. Because those countries depend on customs duties for their budgets. So better recognize this and see how we can do it. In terms of big brother, as I said, Nigeria has always seen itself as a big brother to small African countries. You can imagine there are quite a number of small African countries. Actually, 12 African countries actually make up 80% of the GDP. So most countries in Africa are just basically $1, $2 million, $5 billion GDP, and they can't even afford to have embassies all over. Nigeria can afford. Rather than have countries go out there and have usually you appoint somebody as a councillor. Nigeria can as well say, we will house you and even house some of your representatives in our embassy. Be the big brother. Be the Africa Tractors Group. Because as I say, Africa, there are like 12 countries. Actually, 6 countries are key, but 12 countries actually in Africa is 80% of the economy. How can you work with this to see how to drive Africa? Have a strategy. You have a G7. Globally, you have the G7 that tries to shape things. But in Africa, we should have specialized groups that can say, we are the people who can run things, and Nigeria can organize this group. Faith-based, as I said, Nigeria has all kinds of organizations, Islamic, Christians, that are all over Africa and doing good work. Some of them having schools and serving this. Why not leverage on this and start seeing how you can support? Because other countries use these channels. If you think of Saudi Arabia, has been very good in using the Islamic schools to build the power, but also to fund charitable things, to fund schooling and so on. For example, if you think of Redeemed Church is already in 11 African countries, and they are big churches, and they have a good history of doing certain things. So why not work with that? Because that can also be so the question I was saying, just be creative in how you think about how to use the resources that are already there. Yeah, and therefore, in terms of finishing up, we need image building, as I say. We need to strengthen government. We need consultant PR. Nigeria really needs to do a lot of PR, public relations, yeah, to start that. we need to start building an image of Africa. If you think of channel, an African channel, Nigeria should think of how do we build an African channel. China is already spending 7 billion on this Chinese. I'm sure everybody now has seen this Chinese broadcasting network because they need to start building their image. Let's change Africa's story. Lead Africa in changing history. Our history curriculum obviously has a problem in the whole of Africa. If you look at China, they're always fighting with Japan over history. Right now in America, there's a big war about history, teaching history. In UK, the same thing. Because unless you start changing that lower level, then you'll never change the narrative up here. Because people have to come up understanding their history properly. If you think of it, we have very rich history, but we never hear. History is a colonial history. What we know to create a documentary and really tell stories of African and Nigerian, African heroes. Yes. So that is what, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say. And just as a pointer there, if you think of it, the U.S. Department of Defense, some interesting fact, has funded over 2,000 films in Hollywood. People think that Hollywood just goes on its own. U.S. Department of Defense understands the power of soft power and has been funding. If you think of films like Terminator, all those films have some funding from the Department of Defense. And anyway, that is my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you very much, Dr. Julius Gatsune, for a very enlightening presentation, what it takes for Nigeria to be in leadership, especially in the areas where he focused on desire, willingness for us to do so, hard power, soft power, creating a economic strategy, creative economic strategy. We all know that our entertainment and culture industry is one of a kind. That's the truth. And even being a big brother to other African nations using diplomatic channels, creating an African channel. We apologize, the sound was a bit fuzzy at some point, but I think that having the PowerPoint presentation made a world of good. We'll take the second keynote address right now. Our keynote speaker, Chris Ngwodo, is the Director General of the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, Nigeria's National Early Warning Center. Prior to his assignment, he served as Senior Special Assistant to the President on Policy Research in the Office of the Vice President. Over the past decade, Chris has served on various initiatives focused on governance, conflict, security, humanitarian interventions, peace, and development. In his current role as Director General, he leads the office mandated to identify and address threats to human security and promote culture of preparedness and resilience here in Nigeria. Today, he'll be speaking on Nigeria's geostrategic horizons in a volatile regional neighborhood. Can we welcome the DG, Chris Ngwodo, to give his presentation? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So, Nigeria's geostrategic horizons in a volatile regional neighborhood. What I want to do this morning is engage in a very brief historical excursion through our foreign policy, the history of Nigerian foreign policy, and to get us to a path where we can project forward. Now, when you look back at Nigerian foreign policy over the years, over the course of decades, there have been two contradictory tendencies, and two dominant tendencies have defined how Nigeria has engaged the world and how specifically it has engaged Africa and its own immediate regional neighborhood. So the first tendency, which was dominant between the 1960s and the 1980s, a period widely regarded as the golden age of Nigerian diplomacy, was defined by a very confident, assertive, and some would say even aggressive activist foreign policy posture. So during this period, Nigeria established itself as an anti-colonial power dedicated to ending the last vestiges of colonialism in Africa. It strongly supported liberation movements in Southern Africa in places like Mozambique, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, including those that were committed to armed struggle. It led the continent's campaign against white minority rule and apartheid in South Africa. It established itself as a major contributor to peacekeeping and mediation efforts in various countries. Nigerian troops, Nigerian peacekeepers have served right from 1962 in Congo to places like Lebanon, Chad, Somalia, Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Sierra Leone, Liberia, India, Pakistan, several countries across the world. Since 1960, over 100,000 Nigerian troops have served in peacekeeping missions. By 2000, Nigeria was actually the second largest contributor to UN peacekeeping missions globally. During that period, Nigeria also led regional integration efforts by establishing, in tandem with the Republic of Togo, the Economic Community of West African States. So ECOWAS is very much the brainchild of General Yakubu Gowon and, at the time, President Dassigbe Eyadema of Togo. During that period, as the first keynote speaker, Dr. Gatune, pointed out, the Technical Aid Corps was also established. And I think it's interesting that we are not very accustomed to thinking of ourselves as a giver of aid. We think of ourselves more as a recipient of aid. But in fact, the Technical Aid Corps is one of perhaps Africa's best examples or best models of developmental volunteerism and aid. Under that scheme, thousands of Nigerian professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, are deployed to African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries to bring development, to essentially aid development efforts in those countries. During that golden age, we also established ourselves as a cultural power by driving initiatives such as the Festival of Black Arts and Culture, FESTAC, famously FESTAC 1977 being one of the earlier editions, really established Nigeria as a cultural power. And the idea at the time was to position Nigeria at the heart, as the cultural and spiritual heart of the global Black community. In the 1980s, we established the concept of medium powers, a strategic forum that was meant to create an alternative path away from the superpower rivalry between Soviet Union and the United States. So these and many other measures defined the golden age of Nigeria. And at the time, such was the confidence and assertiveness of our foreign policy that the American news magazine Newsweek dubbed Nigeria the first Black power. And I know that many times it seems that Nigerians obsess with being the giant of Africa or leading Africa, but it's important to stress that this is not a peculiarly Nigerian obsession. All over Africa, many people have come to believe that Nigeria's assets, Nigeria's resources, position her as a natural leader in the continent. As Dr. Gatune pointed out, our assets and our resources create a natural hegemonic potential that we must exercise for the good of the continent. The great Kenyan Pan-African scholar Ali Mazrui actually argued at one point that Nigeria should acquire nuclear weapons, in other words, a black bomb, as he called it then, to bring a balance to the racial monopoly of nuclear weapons, the racial monopoly of the ownership of nuclear weapons at the time. Fortunately or unfortunately, Nigeria is committed to nuclear non-proliferation. So that is how our golden age was. It was a time in which we bestrode the world stage with confidence, with a lot of pride, and with really an attitude that positioned us very much on the cusp of superpower status. But today things are different. While today Nigerians remain some of the world's most adventurous migrants, we have a large diasporic communities, our people are among the most accomplished wherever they go, we must also come to terms with an opposing tendency within our foreign policy establishment, and indeed just within, in general, our disposition to the world and to our continent and our region at large. Nigerians can also be very insular. We have a tendency to be indifferent to events happening around us, events happening actually just beyond our borders. We have also struggled with our own bouts of xenophobia. We have struggled with times in which we were not very welcoming to migrants from neighboring African countries. Now, this tendency cannot be attributed to any natural xenophobic instinct or any visceral hatred of foreigners. Nigerians are generally warm, welcoming, friendly people. Rather, this attitude reflects the downturn in our national fortunes from the early 1980s, when the oil boom collapsed and we entered a series of economic recessions. That severely affected our confidence. Our economic challenges have constrained us to prioritize our own internal needs, rightly so. That does make sense. In local parlance, I think we could say that we are struggling to come to terms with the geostrategic and geopolitical consequences of SAPA. I hope you all understand what SAPA means. So that does happen on a national scale. And we are struggling to come to terms with it. We've had to rearrange our priorities, as it were. The steep price in blood and treasure that we paid to bring democracy to places like Sierra Leone and Liberia also diminished our appetite for those kind of missions in general. But above all, it can also be argued that Nigeria, simply by being a country of 200 million people who belong to two major faiths in the world and belong to 250 ethnic communities and speak 300 languages and dialects, simply have a lot going on internally. We're a large country. Our population dwarfs the rest of West Africa, for example. If you took the population of Nigerians under 40 and conceived of them as a separate country, they would still be, by some distance, I think, the largest country in Africa. And that gives you a sense of proportion, a sense of scale, a sense of perspective about the population we're dealing with. So as a result, it is entirely natural that we are obsessed with our own internal dramas. We are also fixated on our own struggles to forge cohesion and coherence out of our diversity. Our nation is in many respects a nation of nations. And this is part of the challenge of our insularity. However, as we move into what is increasingly becoming a turbulent period of the 21st century, it is clear that we cannot continue to be indifferent to events happening outside of our borders. It is clear that we must engage more deliberately, more intelligently, and more strategically with the realities happening just beyond our borders, in our near abroad, in our regional neighborhood. And of particular concern to us is the Sahel. So the Sahel is a zone of Africa that is home to 350 million people. It is a place where some of the world's most urgent threats to human security are converging, whether we are talking about poverty or climate change or conflict or violent extremism or the threat of non-state armed groups or the challenge of bringing economic growth to very young populations. All of these things are converging in the Sahel. Nigeria itself is a Sahelian nation as well. And this, in my view, will be the defining foreign policy challenge of the next decade. How do we engage these issues? How do we engage with our neighborhood? These challenges offer a unique opportunity for us to build a coalition of stakeholders, a transnational coalition of stakeholders across the region, across Africa, to come together and collaboratively tackle these problems. A lingering effect of colonialism, I should point out, is that elites in many African countries, not just Nigeria, are very much oriented towards the ex-metropole. So in Francophone Africa, for example, you might argue that Africans in these countries, African elites particularly, are very much more attuned to events happening in France, just as Nigerians are much more attuned to events happening in Europe or America or England, the Anglosphere in general. This is a lingering legacy of colonialism, and it is one of the things that militates against our ability to come together as Africans and engage with issues just within our own neighborhood. And yet there is no doubt that the events happening just beyond our borders have a great deal more influence on the lives and livelihoods and security of our people than anything happening across the world in far-flung capitals. So just, I think, over the last 2 or 3 weeks here in Nigeria, we've struggled to acquaint ourselves with the name of a dam in Cameroon, and it's suddenly become newsworthy that Cameroon has a dam, but in fact that dam has been there for close to 3 decades. There is in fact a conflict in Cameroon that bleeds into a security situation in the southeast and in the south-south of Nigeria. You would not be able to tell this by merely reading Nigerian newspapers. And that, again, is the challenge of the insularity, both of our civil society as well as of our media. Now, advocates of a more conservative foreign policy will counsel that charity begins at home. So that is the argument for having a very conservative foreign policy, a foreign policy that is very measured, that shies away from aggressive activism or interventionism or adventurism of any kind. And that is true. Charity does begin at home. However, there is an African proverb that says that when your neighbor's homestead is consumed by a fire, you cannot afford to be indifferent, because that same raging fire will likely get to your own house. And so the African worldview that sees threats to a member of the community as threats to the community at large holds very important strategic lessons for us going forward in the way we conceive of our foreign policy and in the way we conceive of our relationships with our regional neighbors. So we cannot afford, for example, to see a problem in the Sahel elsewhere, whether in Mali or in Burkina Faso or in Benin Republic or in Togo, and say to ourselves that these are problems exclusively belonging to those countries. Taking the lead means that we must actualize the wisdom of that African worldview that says that a threat to one is a threat to all. It is not merely a question of self-preservation. It is about conceiving of collective security as something that is rooted in human solidarity. In other words, human security. So national security in the African context, for example, cannot be separated from the human security of people, particularly in the countries that we share borders with. Because we share the same ecosystem, the single most important determinant of a common destiny between people is their common habitation in the same ecosystem. Nigeria is a Sahelian nation. It's part of the Sahelian group of countries. Climate change does not recognize territorial integrity of any nation. Poverty does not recognize the territorial integrity of any nation. And as we've seen, the security challenges in other places in the Sahel inevitably bleed into our own space. They bleed into the places that we regard as our sphere of influence. Historically, if you look at the 1990s, you will see that conflict spread from Liberia to Sierra Leone. More recently, we've seen how the destabilization of Libya triggered a chain reaction of destabilization in the Sahelian environment right down to our neighborhood. In the last decade, we've seen how a homegrown insurgency in the northeast of our country has become a transnational insurgency that threatens Cameroon, Chad, and Niger Republic. This is the nature of trends and threats in an age of globalization. We are in an age that is literally one in which we must think beyond borders. National problems and local problems and regional problems have become all intertwined. And our foreign policy, in thinking of how to engage with our neighbors, we must think of it in that way. there are no longer any exclusively local problems. Any problem that seems local is only local for the time being. Within a time frame of about 5 to 10 years, all the problems affecting countries in the upper Sahel will become problems affecting coastal West African states. The demographic profiles of our countries are similar. Across the Sahel, the median age ranges from between 17 to about 21. So the challenge of providing hope for the world's fastest growing population of young people is an acute one for governments, and it is a challenge that we shared by governments across borders. Because of the commonality of our challenges, working together is not just a good idea. It's not just something born out of good neighborliness. It is an outcome of both strategic necessity and strategic prudence. We must collaborate. We must come together. And this is why forums like this are important. A reflection on how to advance Nigeria's leadership in Africa cannot be complete without Africans themselves. It must be an inclusive dialogue. In Nigeria, as I said, because of the insular tendency that we have sometimes, it is possible that we think of choreographing conversations about Africa that are dominated entirely by Nigerians. But as we will find as we delve deeper into the issues of our continent, Africa is a big place. As we like to say, Africa is not a country. There are 52 countries, 2,000 ethnic communities in Africa. And so that is a lot of people, it's a lot of languages, a lot of cultures, a lot of diversity, a lot of perspectives to get in tune with. And if we are to truly lead the continent, we must see ourselves as facilitators of interaction between the various nations and tendencies in our continent. In other words, the conversation about bringing Africans together must actually bring Africans together. It must be an inclusive dialogue. Another way of putting it is that we are looking for Pan-African solutions to Pan-African problems. Now, Pan-Africanism is a concept that has fallen into disrepute in recent years. There are those that believe that Pan-Africanism failed. And I think that this comes from an inaccurate reading of the history of the concept. But in its origins, Pan-Africanism was, I think, meant to end with the political integration of Africa and the creation of the United States of Africa. The first generation of independence nationalists in African countries saw the struggle for colonialism, or rather the struggle against colonization and colonialism, as being one and the same with the struggle for the dignity of black people everywhere on the planet. So they connected that with the struggle for civil rights in Africa, for example. But here in Africa, how we also conceived it was that at a terminus, at its ultimate terminus, the Pan-Africanist movement would coalesce in the formation of the United States of Africa. Obviously, that did not happen, and for that reason, people have come to believe, erroneously and quite unfairly, that Pan-Africanism as a concept failed. I disagree. I think a more accurate way of framing the challenge is that Pan-Africanism aspired to too much, too quickly. That is to say, while political integration is desirable, political integration will not happen by itself. Political integration will be the outcome of other integrative processes starting in the domains of civil society, starting in the domains of the economy, and the like. In other words, we must first become integrated economically and socioculturally before political integration becomes a manifest reality. So today, we must consider ourselves, particularly in the context of Lead Africa, as championing a kind of Pan-Africanism 2.0. And Pan-Africanism 2.0 must do what Pan-Africanism, the first iteration, failed to do. It must focus on people. We cannot have an integration that is prosecuted as an affair of governments alone. If only national governments are the key actors in integration, what we will end up doing is we will create a supranational bureaucracy that is alienated from the people in the way that many African governments are still alienated from their own populations. So we must see the process of integration, as something that is actively being orchestrated by the civil societies of our respective countries. It must be an interaction by the publics of our respective countries. There must be exchanges of ideas and perspectives. The Pan-African conversation that we have in mind is one that is led by the people themselves, by the public. It must be led by publics, it must be led by civil society. And the role of our states and the role of government is to facilitate this conversation. Most times when we discuss integration, we talk about the requirements for it in terms of physical infrastructure and administrative structures. But arguably, just as important, and all those issues are extremely important, but just as important, we need to also discuss the cognitive structures, the psychological preparedness for integration, the mental disposition that enables Africans from across different countries to bridge the divides inflicted by colonial languages and colonial legacies, and getting them together on the same conversational platform to reason together, to think together, to arrive at a common consciousness about the problems that affect them collectively. I believe that for Nigeria to lead Africa, it must position itself as the facilitator of this grand African meeting of minds. In this sense, therefore, we must see this integrative process as something that will be driven by a younger generation of voices, a younger generation of visionaries. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, and it only makes sense that those that lead conversations about the issues that will shape the future must be those to whom the future belongs. In other words, it will be those, I think, to put it delicately, that will actually be around in that future when it starts to transpire. So for us at the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, this is what the Lead Africa event means to us. It's an opportunity to inaugurate a new chapter of the Pan-African conversation, led, as I said, by a new generation of voices and a new generation of visionaries who will chart a new path forward into our future with a new consciousness and a new way of thinking. In closing, I would like to quote a statement by Chinua Achebe, one of Nigeria's greatest writers. And I quote, "I believe that Nigeria is a nation favored by providence. I believe that there are individuals as well as nations who, on account of peculiar gifts and circumstances, are commandeered by history to facilitate mankind's advancement. Nigeria is such a nation. The vast human and material wealth with which she is endowed bestows on her a role in Africa and the world which no one else can assume or fulfill." Chinua Achebe wrote this in a book called The Trouble with Nigeria, published in 1983. It was a very scathing critique of Nigerian governance, of our democratic experiment at the time. Overall, it didn't seem like a very pessimistic book, but this actually is on the 3rd page of that book. And what that means is that, contrary to what many people think, we do not have to solve all our problems before we have a more expansive view of the world. Charity begins at home is true, but what does home mean in an age of globalization? Who is my neighbor in an age of globalization, in an age in which all the threats and trends that we face breach borders, have no regard for national borders? These are the things that we must begin to apply our minds to. I thank you for listening.
Can we give Mr. Chris another round of applause, the Director General of the Office for Strategic Preparedness and Resilience? Thank you. He spoke about Nigeria as a giant of Africa, our own realities, our challenges, how we strive to lead the continent and our neighbors, how we relate with them, our collective security, which is our human security, and many other things. Thanks so much. As a reminder, this program is being live streamed on the Imagine Nigeria YouTube channel. We'll move on with the panel conversation in today's program, taking over a renewed leadership in Africa, restoring peace, security, and stability in the Sahel. I'll read the profile of each panelist as we invite them to take their seats, starting with the Executive Director, Tiwalte Peace Network Mali, Fatima Al-Ansar. Can we welcome her? Fatima was previously serving as the head of missions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Mali. She's an expert in the areas of peace building, leadership, entrepreneurship, and will be lending her voice to today's discussion. Thank you, Fatima. Also, I'd like to invite Dr. Sampala Balima. Can we welcome her? She's a political scientist and lecturer at the Thomas Sankara University of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. She specializes in international defense, security, and conflict with a particular focus on violent extremism. Murtala Abdullahi. Murtala is a researcher and reporter. His expertise is in conflict reporting, climate and environmental justice, and charting the security trends in Nigeria and the Lake Chad region. Murtala founded the Goro Initiative and contributes to dialogues, publications, and think tanks that report on climate change and human security. Larry Shashore will be our moderator today. Senior Special Assistant on Planning and Coordination, and also the lead of the Imagine Nigeria Secretariat. Thank you, Larry. And joining the panelists, I'd like to once again invite the Director General of OSPRI, National Early Warning Center, Chris Nwodo, to also join. Amina Wali will be co-moderating this session. So Amina, I'll leave the microphone to you, and to Larry, of course.
Thank you so much, Nika, for the introduction, and another warm welcome to all the panelists for today's discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. As we said previously, this conversation today is about Lead Africa and the various ways in which we think Nigeria ought to continue to do that to ensure its success, to ensure the success of itself and also the continent in general. Our two keynote speakers today have also set out their ideas, starting from sharing with us the historical background of how Nigeria has led Africa in the past, and views and ideas on how it can continue to do so. And we thought that this conversation would also help us to engage with this issue in a bit more detail. So I'm going to start with Chris to begin with. I know you've just finished speaking about the subject, but I would like you to give us a little bit more detail on why it is, in fact, that Nigeria should lead Africa, because a lot of people also always think it's some kind of lack of humility. Just because you're a big country, why do you think it behooves you to lead Africa? Why must Nigeria concern itself about managing regional and continental problems instead of focusing on its own internal problems? You've talked about the fact that Nigeria is so big. So please go ahead. I'd just like you to begin.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do understand if people say just because you're big, that does not confer leadership. But actually, in geopolitics, size actually matters. Size does matter in geopolitics. So if you look at shall we say, the 5 countries, the major 5 countries, the 5 countries in the UN Security Council, the permanent membership, Russia, China, the United States, those are large countries. England, no. Yes, we get that. France, no. But they are part of the European security umbrella that is underwritten by NATO, which in turn is an Anglo-European construct. So size matters, land mass matters. It's not by any means everything. And I think that in the argument about, in the argument for Nigerian primacy on the continent, it's never been about just size. Land mass, yes, that is important. Population is important as well. A land mass in geopolitical terms gives you strategic depth. Population means that you are capable of mobilizing human assets for conflict serially, and these are very important things in geopolitics. But we have other assets and we have other resources that make it clear that our hegemonic potential, for want of a better word, is evident. It is clear to everyone else that is watching. And it didn't come from a place of hubris or a place of unwinning pride or, or arrogance. It was never that. When you go back to the writings of people like Nnamdi Azikiwe or Jaja Nwachukwu or the earliest nationalists in Nigerian history, it was always one with a sense of responsibility. The idea that with great power comes great responsibility, I think, is something that everyone can identify with, or that to whom much is given, much is expected. Nigeria's resources, its riches, it's what it has going for it, set it apart from many other African countries that simply do not have the same quantum of resources. And so our leaders for many years have always seen their role as one that goes beyond just their national aspirations and must get into the continent. Nnamdi Azikiwe talked often, our first president talked often about the dignity of the black man. And you will find that historically Nigeria has always contributed to causes that have nothing, necessarily to do with its own well-being. The conflict in Ethiopia, I think, between the world wars in Abyssinia, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, Nigeria raised funds and contributed generously to that. Nigeria provided legal counsel for Jomo Kenyatta when he was on trial by British colonialists. Nigeria funded very generously the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and liberation movements in Southern Africa. It's always been how we have seen our role, one of a big brother, one of an enabler, and one that by reason of our resources and endowments has a greater responsibility to African humanity and to mankind in general. So it is not something that is rooted at all in arrogance. It comes from a place of responsibility, of understanding that endowments, the scale of the endowments that we have impose on us certain obligations and responsibilities, just as Chinua Achebe said. And even militarily, you'll find that Nigeria's military spending dwarfs the military spending of every other country in ECOWAS. So I think that when you have those assets, when you have those resources, your worldview must allow you see beyond the horizon of your own borders. It would be irresponsible for you to think just in terms of yourself, for us to think just in terms of ourselves. So that is where this idea of African leadership comes from. And I should add that when you look at other countries, with great respect to countries like Rwanda, in geopolitical terms, we would say that there are certain countries that, regardless of how well they might be doing economically, simply do not have the profile for the kind of continental leadership that we have in view. Botswana is a very terrific country, but it's 2 million people. That's not enough. The larger countries in Africa all struggle with internal coherence. Ethiopia is in the middle of a civil war. Sudan split into 2 countries. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been troubled for generations. So Nigeria remains one of the countries. Yes, we have our struggles, and I would never downplay our struggles. But when you balance out our assets and our liabilities, we are still in a place where we must be cognizant of our responsibility to African humanity, to the continent, and to the world at large.
Thanks so much, Chris, for opening up the conversation for us. You've just talked about conflicts in other parts of the continent. I think maybe we'll come closer now and talk about the Sahel. I'm going to now go to Murtala and then to you, Fatima, to talk about the Sahel, because Chris has just made reference to our engagement in conflict in other parts of the country. But I think you switch it off. So I think it would help us if you would share with us your views on why the Sahel, why is it in fact important to us in this country, and why is it that we must be involved and take leadership in relation to the Sahel? Please go ahead, Murtala. Thank you.
So when you look at the Sahel, it's social, cultural, and politically interlinked with Nigeria. And so, for example, that's why former President Goodluck Jonathan is helping with the mediation in Mali. That's why Nigeria initially sent soldiers to Mali after the 2012 rebellion and then the counter-offensive there. And that has been dropped. We have a small detachment of military personnel, more medical personnel, and then the police there. When you look at also the issues in terms of the violent extremism in the Sahel, that has also had an impact on what happens in Nigeria. And then the security situation in northwest Nigeria also has shaped some of the security conditions in Niger. Niger hosts millions of Nigerians that have been displaced by the conflict in the northwest and the northeast. The proliferation of arms in the Sahel has also shaped the conflicts in Nigeria. So the two regions are intertwined together that makes our national security interests a more regional security consideration, and that's why Nigeria keeps to invest in that, providing the same both in terms of political structures, providing investment support to other countries in the Sahel. Earlier, Chris was talking about Cameroon, and you have people talking about the dam in Cameroon. It's an interesting thing when you look at it. So, for example, some of the trends associated with climate change are not just home-based. So when you look at, for example, transhumance migration by pastoralists, which has also been playing a critical role in instability in the Sahel, not just Nigeria. So the farmers' herders issues is not just a Nigerian issue, but it's a Sahelian issue. And some of the people who migrate are not from Nigeria. They migrate all the way from other Sahelian countries to Nigeria for greener pasture, and there's the ECOWAS protocol that allows them to do that. But along the line, as they do that, they get exposed to conflicts. They get the ability to learn certain habits that then becomes a security threat to Nigeria. So these are issues that show the intersection between our countries in the region. So also when you look at it, for example, the flooding issue that Nigeria is facing, upstream countries, whether in terms of the River Niger or River Benue, what happens in those regions also affect us. They help to exacerbate the flooding that we face. So we are all interlinked together, both in terms of the different variables that all countries consider as national security, whether in terms of the people, the environment, the economy, the peace, and the stability in the region.
Thanks so much, Myrtle. I think you need to switch off the microphone. Thank you for opening up the view on the Sahel for us. And I'm going to go to Fatima now on a bit more specific discussion about the Sahel. So we've had about 13 coups, military coups in Africa, and half of those happened or occurred in 2020. Can you share why this might be happening, and whether or not you think that there is a crisis of democracy in the Sahel? I think Myrtle has spoken to the issues around the climate change impact that is going on in the region, but can you shed a bit more light on what it is that might be happening to democracy in the region? Which drives the other? Is it the struggle for resources, or is it the other way around? Thank you.
Hello, I think it should be closer. Hi everyone, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, flying all the way from Mali to come to Nigeria. Of course, it's part of Nigeria is leading already, right? Bringing 2 people from Burkina Faso and Mali to come. So I'm very happy to be here. And I think your question is very important. You mentioned 13 coups d'etat. And in those 13 coups d'etat, Mali did 5 already. And that's without counting the 2 d'etat within the coup d'etat that happened in 2020. So obviously there is a big problem of governments. There is a problem of the model of democracy that has been imposed on us for so many years. And I think I would give like maybe examples of Mali, for instance, which is not very much different from like cases in Nigeria or in Burkina or in Niger. For instance, since the first coup d'etat that happened in Mali in 1968 and then 1992 and then now 2022, we always have the same response to the coup d'etat, which is like sanctioning the leaders in power, for like a year or two, a few months, and then after that, we come back again. We organize the elections, and then give power to the civilians, and then 8 years later, 6 years later, another coup d'etat. Obviously, there is a problem, and the problem is we have never take into consideration what is the real cause of the coup d'etats that are happening. For instance, in Mali, the conflicts in the Sahelian country, the cause of the conflict, there is a lot of reason. There's a drug trafficking, for instance, happening in the Sahelian countries, like Mali. There's an international terrorism and organized crimes that are not taken into consideration. There's a huge youth unemployment rate. Like, for instance, in Mali, we have over 28 youth unemployment rate, which is, those youth are like vulnerable to be recruited by armed groups, by terrorists, that are not taken into consideration when we are organizing the elections, because half of the population, they actually don't vote, for instance, in Mali, because half of the population, the territory, like in Mali, 75% of the population, the territory is taken by the terrorist groups. So there is also lack of access to security, secure education. There is an increase of internal displaced people. Like, for instance, in Mali, we have around 65,000 internal displaced. And then I think in Burkina Faso is around 2 million, right now. It's one of the biggest internal displaced people. And we have more than for instance, in Mali, we have more than 45% of the population which live under the poverty lines. And we have poor governments, which has been the cause of like the several coups d'etats that happen. If you have seen like the requests of the people who have been like on the street marching, protesting, they're always asking the same thing, which is poor governments, nepotism, lack of opportunities, lack of security. That has been the same thing that came out of the young people who went on the street and asked for the change of regime. And we also see young people asking for hope because they are lack of hope, they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities, they think that the government does not care about them. So they kind of feel like they are left out. So they kind of need some kind of support from the leaders in power. So because of all this lack of consideration of like what the population needs, and I think, of course, there will be a crisis of governments because the population do not see themselves with the leaders who are in power. So what we need right now, I think we have to have a social contract in what everybody sees themselves within it. Not like a model of a democracy that have been taken elsewhere, bring to us, have never been contextualized, have never been understood by the local population. And I will give you a great example. In last year, because I was the country director for an institute, Timbuktu Institute, which does research. So we have done a research right after the coup d'etat in all over Mali when we asked the local population about what are their thoughts about the coup d'etat, what should be the priority of the transition. Is it organizing the election? Is it the security? What is it? 92% of the population were like, they do not care about elections right now. What they want is security. And by that time, ECOWAS, African leaders are organizing big meetings, putting sanction on the leader in power because they are not organizing the election without understanding that the problem is not organization of elections. If that was the solution, we wouldn't be having like several coups d'etats in those different countries. So they put sanction in Mali, they put sanction in Guinea, they put sanction in Burkina Faso. But those sanctions haven't helped those countries. Actually, those sanctions have put those countries in a more vulnerable situation because the countries are already taken by terrorists, by insecurity. Now you put sanction on them. Now there is no trade happening between borders. Economic opportunities went down. So there was a huge economic crisis that happened because of the sanction. So I think it's very, very important for us to go beyond that model of democracy that have been imposed to us. I wouldn't say that we should go to the militarization of the system, of the Sahelian democratic system, because that's what we're seeing with the several coups d'etat. But I think we should put the people first. So we have to listen to the local people. We have to listen to the priority of the locals. If the local people say that we want security, so how can we have an inclusive security? How can we tackle youth unemployment? Because that's a big issue. If you see that terrorism are having an ampler power in the Sahelian country, is because they are recruiting youth who do not have money, lack of knowledge, lack of education, lack of job to recruit them. So let's get those youth. And I think that's where Nigeria can play a big role. You guys are very good in business. And we are inspired back in Mali by how like Nigerians are like hardworking, good in business. You can really help develop leadership skills, entrepreneurship to one of the Malian youth entrepreneurs. There could be exchange program with the Malian youth. We can do that. You guys are good. Oh, okay.
Sorry, excuse me, Fatima. You're going to another issue which I think is really interesting, and I think we ought to come back to it.
Okay,
How
no
is it
problem.
that we can then address that?
Okay.
But I'm going to go to Sampala very quickly to seek your views on what your view is on the state of democracy then in the Sahel region. It sounds like Fatima thinks that there is a crisis of democracy. What is your view? And then we will talk about how Nigeria ought to respond. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's my first time to Nigeria, and it's a very great pleasure. Hoping you're here because you will hear a French English. Don't judge me. I will try to respond. What I can say about democracy, my vision is that democracy in Africa contains an issue, a principal issue, because it gives a power to who does not ask for him and who does not understand him, the power of vote. If the population doesn't understand, doesn't know what is the real power of vote, how can it understand that it is important to go to vote and not to change his vote with money, with a bag of rice, with anything else. How can we deal with corruption? It's very difficult. I think democracy has contained another issue. It asked for many money to operate our election. What do we do? Our country our countries do what? Go to take debt, to try to operate this election in our countries. So we don't have the means now for the model of democracy which is proposed to Africans. It doesn't mean that democracy is not a good thing. It just means that we are poor countries by now, and we can't operate democracy as well it has to be. Sahel and democracy in our countries, when we consider Sahel state, for what reason we have now coup d'etat? It is because there is, I think, disruption of equality between citizens in our countries. When we take some parts of some countries, not some countries, of all African countries, there is no state, a lack of state, no social service, the basic needs are not met to citizens. So it creates frustration. I don't know if the word is frustration. It creates many frustration. And the coup d'etat is also the fact of the quality of our armies. When citizens are not content, joyful, are not joyful for the governor, for our leader, they manifest. And when they manifest, because we don't have armies that have mind, which is apoliticized, apoliticized mind, what happened? They say that they will take their responsibility to take power, and they just want to lead our countries. But I think they have no how can I say it? Competence, skills. It's not their role to lead countries. So we have to deal really, like she said, with our social problems, our social issue, to deal with the disruption between towns, between citizens, between even our countries. I think Nigeria in this place can lead really our countries, because, like she said, we are inspired by Nigeria. There are many solutions. There are many, comment tu dis, many de bonnes raisons. Good reasons. Yeah, good reasons for us, for Nigeria to take a leadership for the change. We have to create a change in Africa, and I think Nigeria is at the good place to do this.
Thanks. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. I'm going to ask Chris the same question. Is there a crisis of democracy in the Sahel? And it seems as if it's also a good time to talk about how Nigeria can respond to that. So can you answer those two questions?
Right. Thank you. Merci, Sampala. Is there a crisis of democracy in the Sahel? No, it's not a crisis of democracy. It's a crisis of statehood. That's what it is. It's a crisis of legitimacy, and it's a crisis of the social contract. I think, as Fatima said, the issue is really about whether governments can deliver on, the inherent promises of a social contract. In other words, where does legitimacy of a government come from? Does it simply come from the ballot? I think in the 90s, after the end of the Cold War, when we had that wave of democratization, there might have been a conceptual mistake that was made in our haste to democratize. Or I should say now, in the process of our democratization, we erroneously thought that all we needed to do was simply to have elections and everything would be fine. An election is just one part of that equation. Actual elections have to provide mandates. In other words, an elected government must have a mandate. And beyond the mandate, in order for the government, the elected government, to have legitimacy, then it must deliver on the promises of a social contract. It must deliver public goods. It must secure the lives and livelihoods of the people. When it does not do that, then its legitimacy comes under question. And at that point, almost anything can happen, including extra-constitutional disruptions of the government, whether by means of a military coup or by insurrection or any other thing. But I find this current spate of coups in the Sahel or in West Africa, Africa generally, also telling, and particularly the climate, the context in which they happened. In 2000, there was a coup in Côte d'Ivoire. Henry Konan Bedie's government was overthrown by the military. And ECOWAS at the time also tried to impose sanctions. It moved to initiate sanctions. But I recall at the time the Secretary of ECOWAS, Abbas Bondo, he said that ECOWAS was facing a dilemma, and he called it the dilemma of the good coup. That's what he called it, the dilemma of the good coup. And what he meant was, how does ECOWAS respond to a situation in which, yes, you have a coup d'etat, but from all indications, the public is massively in favor of the coup? And I see a repeat of that situation now across the Sahel. In Burkina Faso, the first coup d'etat was accompanied by protests in support of the coup. In Mali, sanctions have, if anything, what sanctions have done apparently is to drive the Malians into greater support for the regime. In Guinea, it was the same. So I think there are two levels of response to this. First of all, my thinking is that sanctions are always the nuclear option. If you use the nuclear option too quickly, then you have nothing left to use. And arguably, perhaps we move too quickly with the sanctions. So now we denied ourselves the latitude for further negotiation. So rather than quickly or instinctively reaching for sanctions, perhaps what we should be looking at is, first, we have to develop a language within ECOWAS or just among ourselves as African countries for censoring elected governments that behave badly. We are very good at condemning undemocratic governments because they are easy, quite frankly, to condemn. They are simply undemocratic. But what of elected governments that simply behave badly, that are irresponsible, that don't deliver on a social contract, don't deliver on public goods? We don't say much to them. And in these instances that we've pointed out, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, you had elected governments that were overthrown. The public opinion within a place like Guinea, for example, held that under the former president, when civil liberties were abused and protesters their human rights were being violated, ECOWAS said nothing. But when he was overthrown, suddenly there was a rally. When things like that happen, it makes ordinary people think of continental bodies or regional bodies like the AU or ECOWAS. It makes them think that this is simply a trade union of leaders, of political leaders, and that's bad for the legitimacy of those institutions. So we have to find a language for censoring elected governments when they behave badly. Secondly, we need to focus a lot on the sort of democracy that will work here, the structures of democracy that we use. So, and what I mean by that is we should probably emphasize a lot more on participatory democracy, more local governance. In Mali, I think it's in the terms of the Algiers Accord that you need more local governance. Is that it? More local governance. Mali is vast. It has a central administration, but because of alienation between the central government and the rest of that country, I think effectively maybe 2/3 of the country is outside of government control. You need local governance. That is, you need communities having a measure of control over their destinies. In Mali, there are people far away that do not see themselves included in the Bamako state. Bamako represents the state, the Malian state, but they are too far away from that. Arguably here in Nigeria, where we also talk about things like ungoverned spaces, that is a facet of that problem. It's the absence of local governance structures that creates ungoverned spaces. So I think that that is an area, those two areas for me are the areas in which I would look at prioritizing. Now, as to what Nigeria can do, I think one interesting side effect of what has happened is that next year will be our 24th year as a democracy. It's our longest stretch of democracy. But because of all this stuff happening across the region, it also means that Nigeria is probably the oldest democracy, or one of the oldest democracies there is now in West Africa. So, right? So, interestingly, so strangely, democracy has become part of Nigeria's exceptionalism. And we are in a position to say that, look, we've been at this for a while, we've had a lot of experience, we know what works, or at least we know stuff that does not work, and we can help shepherd other countries through that process. I see the skepticism on your face, but you know, and I will argue my point. I could argue that Francophone countries right now are undergoing a cycle, a historical process that Anglophone countries underwent in the 1980s, right? So we had our cycle of coups, Ghana had its cycle of coups, Liberia had its own cycle, and then we got past that. We spent 30 years and then realized this was a massive mistake, and then we tried to improve. Now, when I see Francophone countries, so you've had 2 in Burkina Faso, 2 in Mali, yeah, and then in Guinea, you have, what was interesting in Guinea was when the new leader came on board, the military leader, in his inaugural speech, he quoted Jerry Rawlings' speeches from the 80s. Not Jerry Rawlings as civilian president, but Jerry Rawlings as a military officer taking over. So the ideological influence and the stylistic influence of military coups in Anglophone countries is clear in Guinea. So when I say that we are in a position to help shepherd countries through this process, I think part of it is just being able to say to them that, look, this will not end well. And we have to find a way to sort of shepherd them through this process. But what I will say is that at this very moment, if a country is facing existential threats, and as you've heard, as is the case in Mali, you are not going to find publics that will tell you that their immediate priority is elections. So we have to have a more nuanced approach to this situation.
So I think, thanks so much for that. And I think Fatima had, you did have a response, or you had thoughts on what it is that Nigeria should do. So I'll just let you finish that thought before we go to Murta.
Thank you. And I think he kind of touched base. I was like, Nigeria, we can learn what Mali is going through. It's something that Nigeria have been through in the 90s. So of course we can learn from that experience. How did you move to that hectic moment to a better, like, I wouldn't say 100% better, like, at least better than Mali. So we can learn from that, of course. And I think also in terms of business opportunities, I think there is a lot of need for youth employment, because youth employment is a big issue. And that's a big challenge and obstacle for long-lasting peace for Mali. And I think doing an exchange program, of course, language is a big barrier. So already we need to do exchange programs so that people can learn from each other's culture, languages. And that's one thing that I think Nigeria can really help a lot with Mali. And also take important decisions, like to support Mali, for instance, or like, he mentioned sanction leaders who are like violating, how do you call it, violating civil rights during their term, instead of like waiting after a coup to sanction people. And that can only happen during like ECOWAS decisional meetings. So it's, with Nigeria, is seen today as like a good model for what we call democracy for West Africa. And I think their voice matters a lot in those meetings. So it will be very important to support countries like us in terms of leading us better.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm going to go to Sampala, because you've talked, so we've addressed the question of how Nigeria can support, but in order for us to do so, we've got to be able to understand one another. How do you think then we can bridge the gap? Because it seems as though colonialism was designed to separate us, because language is a big part of the issue. So how is it that we can bridge the gap between all of these countries, Anglophone Africa, Francophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, to solve the problems that we all seem to share?
A big support?
A big support we can use to deal with that gap is soft power. It's a soft power. What I notice it is that I just want to take 3 seconds to come back on the issue we have by now in Sahelian regarding Sahelian coups. We have 2 issues: security issues and state issues. And what does it create? If you notice, the last coup are bringing by insurrection, but it's important to see, to look at the quality, the quality of that insurrection. What I think we are now, we have now an instrumentalized opinion in our countries that when insurrection comes, yes, there is social problems, but we face now to another problem: instrumentalization of our national opinions, and I think it's a very big problem with which we have to deal. And if our national opinions is favorable to be instrumentalized, it is because of the level of education. And it is because of that I say the real opportunity we can build is to use soft power by using education, by creating, for example, I think it's unacceptable that me, as doctor, which are a country, neighbor country, which is Ghana, I have a high-level diploma, and I'm speaking difficultly in English. What does it mean? The symbol is great. The symbol is grand, big. It means that we haven't created opportunity for our population to get an exchange program, even to learn the language which is practiced in the other country. That is the high level. Considering the low level, how many people have we today in our country which are not educated? If they are not educated, how can they understand the strategic problems, issues we have in the world now? To understand, if they are not educated, it's easy to instrumentalize their opinion. And I think we have to deal urgently with these issues if we want to have a change in the middle term and in the long term.
Thank you so much for that. I certainly take the point about the language. I mean, and the unfortunate thing is I think Anglophones are even less, they have lower capacity to speak other languages than the other way around. I find that French speakers and Lusophones, Africans are better equipped to communicate with the rest of the world, but not the other way around. Thanks so much for that and for all your effort in responding to the questions. Despite the language challenges. So I'm going to go to you, Murtala. And to talk about our common challenges. In light of the common challenges that we have identified, it's quite clear that there is some degree of cooperation. There is a great deal that is desired. And I think so far we can see, I think a lot of the softer stuff, there is less cooperation there. But in terms of security and the economy, those traditional staples, we are better engaged on those. Now, what would you say was the missing link that would enable us to drive economic growth and prosperity in the region? And what do you think that Nigeria's role ought to be? I know this country plays a significant role in the regional bodies, but then it just doesn't seem to have given us quite the right results that we would like to see. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again. I just want to ask a question. Among us, the English speakers, how many of us speak French? I don't know if Chris speaks French. I attempted to learn French last year, and I ran away, kind of like find it difficult, a lot of like the way the language is. But if there's something that I've learned is that Nigeria is, I don't know, we're kind of unique. We're surrounded by French-speaking countries, and most Nigerians don't speak French. How do you want to integrate with people that way? How do you want to influence others when you don't speak the language? Surprisingly, the French-speaking countries speak English. More of them speak English than, and when you go to our education system, a lot of us offered French in secondary school, but we don't speak French. So I think the framers, those who design our curriculum, put French in there so that we can have generations of Nigerians that speak both French and English, and so that we can, apart from the soft power influence, we can also have other form of influence in the region, so that we can all develop together, we can have better coordination and cooperation. And as Chris was saying, if you want interconnectivity between countries or Pan-Africanism 2.0, it's not about the government but about the people, and language plays a critical role. So one way I believe that the Nigerian state can really do is to look at why have we been teaching French for decades, but our people can't speak French. If we can fix that, then we can begin to really solve some of the fundamental issues that makes cooperation difficult. So when you look at, for example, multinational joint task force that is conducting operation in the Lake Chad Basin between Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, you have countries that speak Arabic, French, English. Soldiers were finding it difficult to communicate because the other guy from Chad, he doesn't speak Hausa, he doesn't speak English, he speaks French and probably Arabic or another. So along the line, the part of what the review they did was to get more Nigerian soldiers to begin to speak French, to learn French, and then, but again, surprisingly, we have more people who speak, for example, Hausa. When you go, for example, security forces that are cooperating between the border of Katsina and Maradi, you have them, they could speak in Hausa, and it's a better way of them coordinating than for them to speak in their national languages. So also when we go up north, we have people who can speak Kanuri, they can collaborate with their Cameroonians or Chadian counterparts. So I think language is one of the important areas where Nigeria needs to really review, and let's encourage more Nigerians to speak French. That way we can be able to explore some of our exceptional areas where we have made a lot of progress. The other one is in terms of infrastructure. Infrastructure is one of the critical ways where people interlink together. The road network is the reason why someone from Asaba will go to Borno and do business, or why someone from Sokoto will go to Imo to sell cattle. So also in terms of how are we integrated in terms of our infrastructure? What was the update in terms of the Trans-Sahara corridor in terms of movement? We've been moving for centuries. Folks have been moving all the way from Mali, from Guinea-Bissau to Nigeria through irregular routes. Well, why is it that we don't have a train service that takes you from Lagos to Bamako? Why? You can't integrate when you can't really move along, that kind of thing. So if you improve the language barrier, you need to also improve transportation. And surprisingly, when the Nigerian government was trying to invest in the Maradi train route, there was a huge buzz. Why are you spending our money building train to Maradi in Niger. Oh no, the president must be from Maradi because Daouga and Maradi is very close, literally. So, but these are some of the things that also Nigerians do not understand, and it's the responsibility of the government to say yes, the investment in terms of building train to Niger, these are the benefits: improved trade, improved cooperation, it's improved our general security. But so also when you look at in terms of the electricity that we provide to our neighbors, in terms of Benin Republic, Niger, these are, although they pay us for it, but it's also a way of cooperation. We talk, we negotiate, and all these helps these countries to move together. However, despite all these things that we do, we still take nationalistic policies like the border closure. The border closure did a lot of damage to trade in the region, and not just with our immediate neighbors, but down across in the Sahel. When you go to markets in Kano, you find people from other Sahelian countries coming to buy grains or coming to sell things. So that border closure did a lot of harm than good. In fact, when you look at in terms of the security benefit, there was probably little that was gotten from it. We would have gotten more if, for example, we had cooperated more with the Sahelian countries to find out how do we stop arms proliferation, how do we tackle smuggling, how do we tackle illegal migration. So we'll have done better if we talk. So I think we need to talk more. We need to work together. We need to also maximize our resources. When we keep taking nationalistic steps, we invest a lot more and we don't get more from it. So, but when we begin to really cooperate in terms of intelligence, in terms of security, in terms of development, we will get a lot more. One area that you also that Chris mentioned in terms of, so what again can Nigeria do in terms of really being more aggressive in terms of our action to support other countries? Sadly, SAPA is real for us. We don't have lots of money. We have huge population, technically around 200 million people. How do you feed those people? And secondly, we have oil that is disappearing and we keep hearing what we have discovered. So there's revenue issues. The government is also finding it difficult to solve a lot of issues. We have insecurity across board. Insecurity in Nigeria is both contagious in the sense that we are getting from what is happening in the other part of the Sahel, and we are also exporting to the Sahel. So whether in terms of what's happening in the south of Nigeria, where you have Cameroonians who are now refugees in Nigeria, then you have Nigerians who are refugees in Cameroon because of the insecurity in the two countries. Then when you go to Niger, when you go to Chad, there's a lot of contagious nature in terms of our insecurity. So first, I think when we improve our security conditions here, we will be able to also support other countries. And so when you look at it, we don't have enough boots on ground in terms of our support for the Sahelian countries, especially the G5. The G5 is struggling to do its work. And the G5 is the Sahelian task force to help counter terrorism and insurgency, created by the French government as a way of having the Sahelian countries do more in terms of the French forces. And now what we're seeing is that France is finding it difficult to operate in the region. Mali has pushed France out. Although this is something that also ECOWAS needs to really wake up. There's a geopolitical battle that is happening in the sub-region between the Russians and the Western world. So ECOWAS needs to step in to play a bigger role and fill in the vacuum. And so even the security gap. On a normal day, Nigeria should be the one supporting the G5 in terms of both boots, in terms of equipment, in terms of funding. But we are unable to do that because of our own domestic challenge. So improving our own security domestically, it's important for regional security in the region. So also in terms of our economy, we are a destination for lots of migrants across the region. People, there's this cloth that they call, it's made from tie and dye. Folks bring it from Guinea-Bissau, from Mali. Nigerians use it a lot. I've forgotten the name. Even the tailors come. Yeah, I've forgotten the name anyway. Yeah, so even the tailors, they come all the way from Mali, and they work here in Nigeria. They sew those clothes. This may look small, But there are important ways in which we are supporting economic development in our region. So we need to really look at how we can also support economic integration more better. And then also in terms of the technical aid call, how can we do that more in terms of supporting other countries to build up their governance style and other things. So yeah, it's quite, in summary, I would say the problems are like a mat. They are knitted together, and we need to do a lot more and to untangle them and solve them together, but we also need to stop being nationalistic and see regional security as a priority.
Thank you, Murtala. I mean, that's quite a thing to balance your national priorities vis-a-vis regional priorities, recognizing your responsibility to the region and also your responsibilities internally as well. I think it's quite a heavy thing to balance. But thank you so much to all our panelists this afternoon. I'm just going to invite everyone to just say a final word before we just take questions from anyone in the audience. If there are any final things that you would like to close with, thank you so much for engaging with us so far on this issue. But I'm going to start with you, Chris. What are the final 1 minute that you have on this issue? Nigeria leading Africa, how are we going to do it?
We will do big things and we will do small things. We can start by promoting the sort of exchanges that Fatima and Sampala have talked about. We can be much more intentional about closing the gap, bridging the gulf, particularly linguistically, between our peoples. We can invest in some of the things that Murtala has spoken about. So there are big things and small things to do, but I think that through forums like this and other engagements where civil society and state actors are involved, we can get to a point where Africans become more familiar to each other. And it really is very curious, because when you travel across West Africa, just West Africa, never mind the rest of Africa, just West Africa, our towns are so similar. We are so the same. We are very alike. I mean, the languages, and by that I mean the local languages, the indigenous languages, the footprint of the indigenous languages, it just spreads out. It's all over there. We have so much in common, so much more in common. So I think that the colonial legacy can be overcome by deliberate commitment to integration, in the big and small things. So this is a good start in terms of having a Pan-African conversation, putting Africans from different countries on a panel and getting them to reason together about collective issues. Thank you.
Okay, Fatima, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think Chris have touched what I wanted to say, but I think we need to have an African solution to African problem. Our problems is not France, it's not Russia, it's not UK, it's not the US who's going to solve it for us, because they are gaining out of the instability, the strategy of division. They are the one who created. So stability and regional support, African Union, African being one, African getting together, understanding each other is not something that will arrange them. So of course, they will make everything to destabilize us. So we need to be taking ownership of our future, taking ownership of our land, of our people, by educating ourselves more, investing, helping each other, investing in our youth, investing in education, and doing more exchange programs like the one we are doing today, so that we embrace more our differences and our similarity, because what makes us similar and what makes us different is our greatest, how do you call it, our greatest, greatest thing to really learn from. So I really hope that this will not be the last time. I'll obviously come to Nigeria, and I invite all of you who are in this room who wants to come to Mali, just reach out to me and see how really together we can come out with like a concrete solution for like getting Africa out of this like crisis that we are facing today.
Thank you, Fatima. Sampala, you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much. What I would like to say is that it's easy to talk, to enjoindre. Enjoindre.
To join?
Enjoindre.
Oh, to join, yeah.
Okay. It's easy to say to Nigeria to be the leader of Africa. It's easy to give all these advices. But what is my opinion is that we have to do small things if we want to have a big future. And this is a position we have to get together. We have to create spaces of expression, of African expression, in where each country and each representative of each country can take speech to speak. We have to speak with each other. It begins by that. It begins by speaking, by knowing ourselves. I want to know more Nigerians, to know more about Nigeria, to know more about Mali, to know more about Ghana. I want to deal with that cultural gap first. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, and I'm going to start with her last point. I think we need to know each other more. And that's why conversations like these, the Imagine Nigeria conversation, it's quite, I think this is probably the first time where I'm in a transnational Sahelian conversation, and you get to really understand the perspective of the other person. So I think it's super important. We need to talk more, and Imagine Nigeria thumbs up, guys. So we need to have more of this conversation. That's where it starts, and this is where people begin to connect. It's more important for the Sahelian countries to connect in terms of the people-centric than more government-centric. The government-centric bureaucracy, it takes a decade, 2 decades, but when people connect, they could move things within days. Tech corporation, just imagine a tech company in Lagos cooperating with a tech company in Bamako. They could do imaginable things by weeks. Why to take the government decades to do that? So let's talk. The media space in Nigeria, we don't know. I don't know. Our media space, we are just more Nigerian. We don't really talk about what's happening in the other regions. And when we do, a lot of times it's mostly about the conflicts there. Oh, there's a coup in Mali, bam. That's where the Nigerian media will talk. But we need to also find a way to ensure that our media space is able to expand more, to cover more in terms of the people of other regions and how, in terms of our similarity. ECOWAS needs to have a new perspective to what's happening in the region, and also begin to see how it could really change the conversation and review some of the things that are not happening correctly, especially, for example, when we keep talking about the sanctions. Why is the coup happening? Are we really studying that? Are we implementing the studies that have been done? That's super important. And then the other one, in terms of the cooperation of the people, I believe that people need to cooperate a lot. Although they do that, the government needs to provide the infrastructure to do that. I was in Dauraso a few years back, and you could see the young folks who were moving between the border with motorcycles, with smuggled goods. Why can we not formalize that system? Let's find a way to really improve that in terms of our cooperation and trade. And lastly, as we head towards the election in February next year, part of the conversation should be about what exactly is the regional posture of the candidates. Although one of the candidates was talking about in terms of re-energizing the ECOMOC, but we really need to hear from the candidates as we head towards the 2023 elections. What is it? What is their regional policy? What is their regional security perspective? Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, we have, all right. For the purpose of the audience, if you could introduce yourself. All right, thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Somkele Awakalu. And I mean, it's a question directed to all the panelists, but it's more of joining in the conversation. So the first thing I wanted to speak about was the communication. Part of the conversation of the Imagine Nigeria report is not necessarily about today. It's about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. if technology develops to a point where artificial intelligence comes in and you don't really need to learn the language, how does that, the conversation that we're having now, is it still going to be a problem? So if I can walk into Mali and I have an app on my phone that I speak English and it translates to French, what does that mean for the ideas that we're bandying around today? So that's one thought process. Secondly, I think for Nigeria, I think there's not been a lot of conversation, despite I've learned so much from the panelists and keynote speakers, but there's not been a lot of conversation about diaspora relations. So I was thinking about it. The UK just got a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He's British through and through, but he's of Indian heritage. Antonio Costa in Portugal, he's half Indian. His mom is Indian. Kamala Harris has some Indian in her. How can we, given that right now Nigeria is in jackpot season, so in 20, 30 years from now, we'll have Canadians with Nigerian names, we'll have Cape Verdeans with Nigerian names. How do we leverage the diaspora in that way, even without it being directly? How do we make sure that through NIDCOM or whatever new contraption comes in, because even now, as you spoke about internally displaced people, maybe in a generation from now, there'll be Cameroonians, Chadians who are of Nigerian descent. How do we leverage our diaspora directly or indirectly?
Yes, I'm going to take
questions. My name is Nakama Kerry, from the Abu Samad Rabiu Initiative for Africa. My question is this. In terms of the challenges in the region, one of the factors is the intervention of colonial powers or former colonial powers directly contributing to instability in a lot of West African countries. And this has already been established by declassified documents, and I think even 2 months ago, Mali at the UN tried to call for a special UN security session to present evidence of this kind of interventions. And I think that these interventions have gone a long way to stop West African countries from evolving in terms of good governance, in terms of fulfilling that social contract that we're talking about. It has even stopped the elite of these countries to arrive at, you know, that, there's a term for it now, but I've forgotten. Enlightened self-interest, right? To say that for us to move forward democratically, connecting with the people, meeting the people's needs, is an overall success for everybody involved, including the political elite. So these interventions has hampered this growth across West African countries. So how do we deal with this? What's the strategy? What's the posture? What's the posture that Nigeria should take? What's the posture that other African countries should take? What's the strategy? What are the small steps we can take now to address this? Is what Mali did at the UN an example of something that we need to galvanize around, you know, and take action to negotiate and address this? We obviously know that the instability makes it easy to access resources on the cheap and maintain economies across the world. But from our own perspective, what do we do? I know there's the idea that, look, it's partly our fault. If we had our stuff together, we should be able to deal with this, you know, but these challenges typically come hydra-headed. There's never a silver bullet. You don't address one thing at a time. You have to face everything and come up with a strategy. So my question to all the panelists is it a foreign policy issue? Is it a strategy? You know, what do we do? That's my question.
Yes. She had her hand raised up first, sorry.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Regina Alachi from the Shomo Sayadwa Foundation. I've learned a lot during this whole discussion, and thank you to all the panelists. So I'd like to know, most of the times, lack of initiatives and policies are not the problems of leadership or implementation rather. And we know that the main issue plaguing the Sahel is insecurity. So what are those, should I say, realistic initiatives that the Nigerian government and the government of other countries have come up with that is actually functional in reducing or mitigating these insecurities caused by either climate change or poverty, displacement, and other factors? That's just what I would like to know. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the last question. Oh, two more? Okay. Right.
Thank you. My name is Ibrahim Lord Ahmed. I'm Special Assistant to President on Development Policy. I would like to appreciate all the panelists. They have said really beautiful things. I completely agree with them. And I would like to begin by agreeing with Murtala here. In terms of language, we really have serious language barrier. I learned French in secondary school, but I think the few sentences I can remember now is "n'est pas français." I don't know how to speak French anymore, and so I think that this is a great barrier to us. And surprisingly, we can even communicate more better in our domestic language. For example, Hausa, I can speak better with a Nigerian in Hausa than in French and English. Now, my question to the panelists is something I find very worrying. Nigeria, we are doing a lot. Apart from what is being said about Mali, Sierra Leone, privilege, I know we are doing a lot to other countries. I will not say it. And I don't know why I cannot say it and why the government cannot say it. It's probably because when we say it, the reaction from our people, just like the way this Marathi red line, the reaction from our people, why should we be doing that such red line? That is what our people are saying. And on the other side, they will be saying that Nigeria is trying to be hegemonic to them. So the question is, how do we kind of simplify foreign policy to the common people, both in Nigeria and in other African countries, to know that to develop is to develop collectively. What Nigeria is doing, what other African countries are doing, they are doing for the collective development of all. Because foreign policy is a bit, it's not a bit, it's elitist. How can we now simplify it in a layman, so that a layman, a common citizen, can understand it? Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Hello? Yeah. My name is Ash. I'm not here with any organization. I just got here by accident, kind of. But this was awesome. I studied international relations and international economics. This is a perfect fit. Just a suggestion, kind of, or an idea. We were discussing alternative ways for the citizenry to participate in democracy because their central governments seem a bit distant. And one idea, I'm not sure how feasible it is, I want to know what you think about it, is citizen assemblies. Because locally, people know their neighbors, they know their districts and their communities. So why don't we leave military and economic issues? The government should just kind of be there to supervise and to facilitate international trade. But within localities, people who relate to each other, who see each other every day, and who work with each other will know their best solutions for their towns. And then you could expand this to the county level, state level, or whatever. And another thing, I think, on tension between countries from one region to another. We have it in Nigeria. We have it all over Africa because we're proud of our cultures. I think we should have, like, make it fun. Make the competition, the national competition fund by hosting, let's say, competitions, tournaments between the different geopolitical zones. So you can still be proud of, let's say, being from the northern part of Nigeria or from the eastern part. But then rather than have tension where you're constantly going up for each other, you just have a competition where you just have a sports or entertainment and you just see who wins, because then everybody will be more proud of their people, but they'll also be more proud of being in a diverse nation. So, merci beaucoup de vos présences, c'était très sympa et j'adore vos pays. Je suis jamais allé, mais j'ai des cousins maliens. Je connais personne à Burkina Faso, mais bref, merci beaucoup. Thank you all for this, it was awesome.
Thanks so much for that. Yes, to integration. So I think we'll just invite members of the panel to respond to the questions. Should we start from Murtala and go the other way around? Thanks.
I'll say thumbs up to him really for bridging the gap there. So yeah, some very important questions, conversation here, the power of the diaspora. There are a lot of Nigerians doing lots of things across the Sahel, doing business, practicing. Well, I think we need to start from home. How many people of foreign descent have we allowed to play roles in our politics? We have so many Lebanese, Nigerian, so many people who are of different or foreign descent that they will find it difficult to play in our politics, and not because they are not competent, but because we will not allow them to do. So when we start fixing that, we can also begin to see how we can support, even if it's not formally but informally, more of our diaspora communities to begin to play roles there, and that way we can cover up that. AI, yeah, technology, it's making it easy to communicate, and in fact, it's even making it easy to learn. However, physical bond, there's nothing compared to that. Whenever I attend virtual classes, I find it really difficult. But when I'm interacting with people physically, there's this bond that happens. It's not just, it doesn't end with the communication. It builds a lot of trust, a lot of confidence. So there's a lot that comes with physical communication. So the artificial intelligence or whatever that will make communication easy cannot replace the physical bond. In terms of interventions, that's why I said ECOWAS needs to really wake up. When you look, a lot of the spending that goes into security interventions in the Sahel comes from Western counterparts and also the UN. But the UN also gets its funding from Western counterparts. If you look at Nigeria now, Nigeria is becoming a hub for operations, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel because of what's happening in Mali. So if ECOWAS can really get its things in its house in order, ECOWAS can begin to provide some kind of interventions. And again, we should not forget that some of the coup plotters are also providing the information warfare kind of stuff to show that there are certain people against them. France is behind me. Although just trying to find populist stuff that it could get the population behind them. Lastly, I think one issue that we have to do, especially in Nigeria, is strategic communication. So, for example, the US is spending millions of dollars to support Ukraine, and the Americans support that. So Nigeria is spending money, but is even afraid to say we are sending so and so amount of aid to so and so country. It has to do with comms, and that way you can build trust and your population understand why you're doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Murtala. Sampala, do you want to
I didn't understood all the question, so I will give an answer to what I have understood, specifically about the intervention. What I would like to say here is that, in my opinion, Sahel today is an advanced border for European countries. So we need to be in Sahel to contain first our immigration is really important, because a mass of immigration that comes to Occidental countries goes to change or goes to give a new order in those countries. So they need to be to address this problem, this specific problematic. We have to be together. If we don't invent a common solution for that issue, it will be impossible for each country to give a response, just a national response. So to face to that those interventions, I think, and I agree with you, we have to wake up really ECOWAS to think about real solution for all the Sahel. Thank you.
Go ahead, Fatima.
I think I will focus more, I will try to answer more the question on security development and diaspora role. And I think the lady who said that, mentioned security being one of the biggest issue in the Sahelian countries. I think it is, but it's because the lack of development. So, and that's the biggest debate right now, and the challenges we are facing right now is how to do both security and development at the same time. And to give like a short story to support that, for instance, in 2012, in 2011, I built a school because I came from a community in northern Mali, Tuareg. So lack of education for young girls is like an utopic dream because of the insecurity, the social barriers, and a lot of lack of economical opportunities as well. So I was able to have access to education and all of that. So my dream was always to bring education back to my community. And I was actually able to do that in 2012. I built the school. The school was run for 6 months. And then when the terrorists took over northern Mali, they destroyed the school. The girls were injured. So, and that made me think a lot. How can we give access to the education to these people in a very insecurity situation? But the lack of insecurity also is like a big, challenge to the development. So how can we do both at the same time? And for instance, in Mali, we are having a challenge to do that. I feel like the current leaders are focusing more on security than development. And then that means that we are not solving the issue, because the lack of development also will create more insecurity in the country. And I think it's very important for us to actually open a debate about these issues. How can we really do both? Instead of just buying arms, getting plates, but how can we face the humanitarian crisis that the conflict is creating is a very, very important thing. And also to come back to the diaspora role, I was kind of from the diaspora too, because I studied abroad, I came back, and for me, I feel like there is a big lack of trust between those who are in the diaspora and those who are actually in the country. And I think because of lack of opportunities, that's the reason why a lot of people go abroad and decided to work there and never come back and help. And I always say that, unfortunately, the most intellectual people, the most people who are capable of leading, for instance, Mali, are the people who are abroad, because they don't want to come back because of the lack of opportunities, lack of not being accepted by the people, because they think that you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the people, how can you lead us? And we have seen that with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She was actually the first lady of, the first female Minister of Foreign Affairs in Mali. She was from the diaspora. Her name was Kamisa Kamara. I was actually working in her cabinet. She has one of the biggest issues, because they say that she's not from Mali, because she wasn't raised in Mali. She was raised in abroad, even though she's originally from Mali, so that she doesn't understand. So they give us the hardest time to lead the country. So I think like there is we need to change first the mindset of our people on accepting those who are the help of the people in the diaspora, because people think that those who are in the diaspora have the specific agenda to accomplish. So that mindset needs to be changed before we actually even go further on that. To touch a little bit about the technology part that you also mentioned, I don't think technological translate can replace human communication. I think human communication is more intense. You understand and you feel more connected when you talk to somebody in person than having like a machine who is translating. So you are already creating like a barrier between you and with that person. I always think that learning a language and speak to that person voice to voice is always the best approach to create a trust between people. And then to the last point about UN, Mali asking for a special UN security meeting. Yes, Mali did that, but they have never accepted and given the session to Mali, and that's why our Minister of Foreign Affairs took the opportunity at the General Assembly to really hit hard. I don't know if you guys have the opportunity to listen to his speech, because nobody have given the opportunity to have to allow that special session. The five, how do you call it? The five parliament members didn't do it. Even Russia, which is our main partner right now, didn't support. And the funny thing is Ghana didn't do, and Benin, who were the two African, I think the two African countries, right, who are part of the Security Council, did not support Mali too. And that also says a lot, that even us as African, we are not supporting each other. So I would say that the Mali model is the best model, but at least we are looking at different strategies to pass our messages and to face, the superpower countries. Now, what he did is a very courageous thing, because he could have been arrested, who knows, there. So I think it's a debate that we should have about this, and yeah, I think I don't have any more thing to add on that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Fatima. Chris, I want to go to you to just answer as many questions.
I'll just talk about mainstreaming of foreign policy and the issues of foreign intervention in the Sahel. To be very honest, I'm always a bit wary of the foreign interventions arguments, not because of conspiracy theorizing, but I worry about how our own elite become justifications for their own lack of action, right? But I think that what we can agree on is that we live in a context of competing sovereign interests. That's the way of the world. There's nothing new about it. And I think the challenge is, for whatever reason, there's a generation of African elites that found it difficult or finds it difficult to just accept that there is a strategic calculus that informs everything. Back in school, there would be some lecturer that said, not even humanitarianism is humanitarian, right? There is a strategic intent behind everything. And so for African countries, we need to be more strategically minded as well. We need to look within. When Kwame Nkrumah talked about neo-colonialism, he was referring specifically to the relationship between Francophone countries and France, right? That's what he was referring specifically to. I think that what definitely there has to be, first of all, what you need always with any group of people is an elite consensus within. So there has to be an elite consensus about what constitutes national interest, and then you build from there. Some countries are further along that curve than others, but it's an inevitable process. You have to have some kind of internal consensus about what we're about and how to engage the world and our world view in general. We have to have that. Then about, and by the way, that's why I think that something as simple as expanding, or not simple, but something like expanding the UN Security Council permanent membership actually does matter, because at those levels you need representation, you need inclusion, you need people speaking for your region. Otherwise, somebody is just going to keep vetoing things left, right, and center, and you don't get a hearing. Secondly, as far as the question about how do you make people understand foreign policy, we just need to communicate better. We are not doing a good job of communicating what our foreign policy is. Why do we have to do this for this country or that country? And it's the insular tendency I spoke about. 40 years ago, these things were more understood by the public, but that was also because we were in a time of relative prosperity. Now that things are harder, people find it difficult to readily understand or justify why we think helping Sierra Leone or Niger or Mali is a good idea. And I think that there is a clear way to communicate these things. That first of all, you have to make people understand that we face threats in common. We inhabit the same ecosystem. There's virtually no challenge that is exclusively local to us. So, but we have to really, really articulate this better. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for answering all our questions and for such a useful and I suppose eye-opening conversation as well. So just one more round of applause, and I'd just like to have a photograph of the panel together before we move to the final item, really, which is to share what is next for the Imagine Nigeria project. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. If you can just have a photograph of you on stage. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm going to invite Benga Adeshida, who's the lead advisor for the Imagine Nigeria Secretariat. Thank you so much, Mercy. Just to share information on next steps, where next you will see the Imagine Nigeria bus coming to a locality near you. Benga, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Can you have the slides on, please? You have it? Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for coming to join us, either here physically or online. We are grateful to have you. These processes we expect to continue. What we've done to date is the first phase of the program, the thinking, the reflection, and we've produced the reports. We have a website. We have a series of videos. And we have quite a few other information available online that we've released. We've now begun the second phase. Will you please move to, yeah. And this next phase is essentially about engaging Nigerians in Nigeria and in the diaspora and other friends of Nigeria who are outside to begin to engage in a way that we have begin to build this consensus on what we need to do, what we are about as a nation, where we are going, and how we can collectively work together to get to this future. Next slide, please. And so in doing this, we've thought about different activities. Next slide, next slide. We designed a series of activities to engage with civil society, to engage with the private sector, to engage with those who are actually governing, and to engage people from different spheres of life. And the idea is, how do we build a national, a whole of society program that can help drive a continuous engagement with the future, a continuous mobilization of different stakeholders to help drive the agenda of transformation in Nigeria. Next slide, please. So we have, our program is built around 6 main axes. The first is media and briefings. We've been talking to the media, because we think that they have a critical role to play. We've been briefing civil society organizations in the country. We've also been organizing what we call Imaginate events. This is the third one in the series. Imaginate events, we did one in Port Harcourt on green economy. We've done another one here before on national narratives. This one is on Lead Africa. We have a series more planned to be done around the country. And the idea is to engage different stakeholders to begin to see how we can work together in bringing the recommendations of the Imagine Nigeria exercise into life. How do we drive this implementation? How do we drive different stakeholders to take their own role? Because building the future is not something you can outsource to the government alone, or can you outsource to a group of leaders somewhere. We all as a society have to be involved in this process. And beyond the Imaginate events, we've also have a process of building partnerships, trying to see which institutions, which organizations in Nigeria, or even outside, that can help drive this process forward. One of the partnerships we actually engaged with is the Yar'Adua, is this foundation here, the Sheikh Yar'Adua Foundation. We are working with them on a series of activities, and we are trying to plan longer-term activities in driving this process forward. We're also talking to the Sterling One Foundation, for example. We're talking to Africa No Filter. So we have a series of organizations we are engaging with so that this exercise continues. Because the process of building a better future is not something you do one time and you go to sit. It's an ongoing process. And so we are trying to drive partnerships, and if you know other organizations, if you are organizations out there who want to be part of this process, you can reach out to us. Our contact information on our website. Beyond that, we are also planning what we call ecosystem activities. These are essentially analytical work that will take some of the recommendations and take a deep dive to bring out critical ideas on how the different stakeholders can move forward with this. For example, one of our recommendations is to build a green economy. Essentially, how can Nigeria be a leader in the world in an industrial economy that is green? How can we build the next great companies in the green sector? And one of the ecosystem activities we're actually proposing is a study on the global green economy. That is, where the value chains, where are the opportunities lie out there? Where the opportunities lie out there? When we talk about green economy, we tend to talk mainly about solar power, electric vehicles, or recycling. But the green economy is a lot bigger. It's about greening the whole economy, the whole industrial chain. Where are there opportunities for Nigerian companies? So we are proposing some critical studies that can become materials for policymakers, whether in the public sector, whether in the civil society, or in the private sector, to help drive some of this agenda forward. We have a few of those that we are planning, and we are looking for partners to work with in driving some of this forward. As everything that is important, we are also trying to encourage organizations, individuals, citizens, to organize their own Imaginate events, organize their own discussions around the report. What does it mean for us? We have a series of scenarios. We have some recommendations on what we should be doing as a country. What does it mean for us as an institution or as a private sector? What do we do differently? How can we be part of the change that is necessary in Nigeria? So if you need resources on how to organize your own events or to organize your own programs, you can go to our website. And if that is not enough and you want to talk to someone, you can reach out to us and we'll be able to hopefully send somebody to discuss with you or to provide some support. Beyond that is the last resource, is the resource mobilization. You cannot do any of these things without resources. So we are also working to mobilize resources. To date, UNDP has been financing the exercise of this program from the beginning. But moving forward, we think we need to see the exercise within the Nigerian society itself. And so we are talking to foundations, we're talking to institutions that can take the relay in driving the agenda forward in terms of financing. Given that time is going, let me try to wrap up quickly. So I will say you can stop the slide, that's enough. But just to conclude, for those who are online and for those who are here, this exercise is we want it to be a continuous process. We want it to be a living process in which all of us are constantly engaged in thinking about the future, in trying to see how we can drive change within the country itself. And if you want to be part of this process, we are available. You can reach us on our website. We have a lot of we have information there on how to reach the team and how to engage with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olugbenga Adeshida, UNDP consultant, lead advisor. Thank you so much. We'll take some remarks and a video message from the UNDP resident representative. I'd like to welcome Mr. Simon Ridley. Let's welcome Simon. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm going to be giving the message on behalf of our resident representative, who apologizes that he couldn't make it, but we do have prepared remarks. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge our guests here, particularly our panelists, but also all of those that were involved in the organization of the event today. I'd like to give a special mention to the Office for Strategic Preparedness and Resilience, who helped with organizing this event today, and I'd like to just give a special acknowledgement to Chris, the Director General. We're pleased to be working with you on this, but also on many other activities going forward as well. I'd also like to commend the Nigerian government and all those involved in the design of the Imagine Nigeria report. A special acknowledgement goes to all of those people who attended the extensive consultations. I mean, we spoke to hundreds of people across Nigeria, but also global experts and also experts as well from the region. This has resulted in this report, which is now being used as a tool for building the country's future. I would also like to highlight that these Imaginate events are just the beginning of what Imagine Nigeria wants to achieve. Firstly, we want to connect people and organizations around the country. Second, to foster their engagement in reflecting on the Imagine Nigeria recommendations, and also these great futures that are recommended in the report. And third, to take concrete action to achieve these. On the subject of today's events, Lead Africa, we've heard from the panelists today, but I just wanted to provide some reflections from UNDP's side. We believe that Nigeria is well positioned to be the driver of positive change in the continent. As the Imagine Nigeria report highlights, as the continent's biggest economy with the largest population, Nigeria is in a privileged position to, for example, lead the country in reaching common ground for a stronger African voice in the international community. Nigeria can also harness the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to diversify its economy, as well as work to modernize development cooperation by forging mutually beneficial cooperation agreements with its neighbours and beyond its borders. What would UNDP's role be in this process? Well, we've been supporting this participatory exercise from the beginning. In the year 2020, when the world was witnessing the first months of the COVID pandemics, one of the most devastating public health crises, this report was actually designed to be part of the efforts to respond to the pandemic and what we all saw was the possible aftermaths, as a tool to foster thinking on the long term and on building forward and building better. UNDP has gladly supported Imagine Nigeria as the exercise is proof of the country's audacity and foresight to call for a rethink and a national reflection on the future and set today the conditions for an increasingly better future for its people. This is in line with both our global mandate and our cooperation framework with Nigeria. So as I close, I'd just like to encourage everybody to visit the website, follow the Imagine Nigeria on social media, and share your opinions. Let's use those tools that are developed to act together and to build solutions for the country. So with that, I'll close my remarks, but I'd just like to say, in this path to a better future, UNDP will certainly continue its global expertise and capacity to support the people of Nigeria in your efforts to achieve sustainable and inclusive human development. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of today's program. It's been very interesting with all the conversations that have been initiated. And the whole idea behind Lead Africa, behind the Imagine Nigeria project, is to keep the conversation going. So as much as possible, if you happen to be on social media, please remember to use the hashtags and the usernames also. I think that's Nigeria Futures, and on Twitter it's also Nigeria Futures. Larry, you would like to add something? Okay. Okay.
All right, so like I said, please keep the conversation going and let's know how we're doing out there in social media space by tagging us. Tag the UNDP, tag OSPRI, the Office of Strategic Preparedness and Resilience. Just tag us. Once we see the Lead Africa hashtags and all, we will definitely know how well we're doing. Like Simon has said, more programs like this will be coming in the future. We look forward to hosting you once again soon, and I wish you all a very lovely weekend ahead. Thank you so much.